Hello out there, awesome radio family. Thank you for joining us on 107.5 FM and 1570 AM WECU every Tuesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. It's going to start off with a quote today. We need it in where we are with the climate. So it's if a child can't learn the way we teach, maybe we should teach the way they learn. And that is from Ignacio Estrada. And I hope I didn't butcher that name too bad. So are you ready to learn, engage, and inspire? Welcome to Let's Talk K-12 Education Show. I'm your host for the next 50 minutes, Tonitia Langley, education enthusiast, thought leader, founder, and education coach and consultant. I'm excited to partner with you and be dedicated to the heart of our community, which is education. I'm the host, but you and the community mean the most. I would love for you to share your suggestions of what you would love to get more information related to K-12 education at Let's Talk K-12 Education at gmail.com. So, as a former educator and classroom teacher from a traditional public school setting and current education consultant and coach, my goal is to use this platform as an unbiased show to educate and provide information as it pertains to educating our future. That's the goal of the K-12 Education Show, to let others know that in the challenging educational landscape, there is a light that pierces the darkness, and there are educators working in the trenches, stakeholders, and educational thought leaders like myself partnering to close the gap of the school to prison pipeline with tenacity, grit, grind, while providing hope. On last week's show, we explored the topic leading the way to educational excellence with healthy emotional health with guests Shanine Alicia Young and Dr. Eliza Carter, and we provided tons of information regarding the topic. If you would like a recap of those tools and resources for that show, in fact, for any other previous Let's Talk K-12 education show, catch us on the replay and comment hashtag replay by heading over to Facebook, Awesome Radio 107 FM and 1570 with the purple and green logo. Also, we are also on YouTube. Head on over there if you want to. If that feels better for you, that's okay too. And type in www.youtube.com at Awesome Radio WECU. Again, look for that beautiful purple and green logo. So, going to open up our show today and going to provide a first hint of what we're going to talk about today with our guest. Are we teaching content or are we teaching our students? How can we ensure that every student, regardless of their background, sees themselves reflected in our lessons and feels empowered to learn? Remember that feeling of excitement when a teacher connected a lesson to something you cared about? Let's bring that feeling to every student every day. It's not enough to simply add diversity to our curriculum. We need to fundamentally transform how we teach and what we teach. So, being a wife, mother, and former middle school teacher and grandmother to 8 amazingly adorable grandbabies, and currently an education consultant and coach, I recognize the importance of the ability to have critical thinking skills. Lean in and listen up. Let's get warmed up and ready for our show today with How is Your Brain Game? To drive your K-12 educational mindset shifts out of park and into drive. Let's engage your critical thinking skills for school, homework, and school tasks with your children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, godchildren, and the whole crew. So here we go with our second hint of what we're going to be talking about today. Riddle me this. I'm something that connects students' lives to what they're learning each day. I grow stronger when teachers know more about who I am, and I can unlock potential in every classroom. I'm built on a foundation of respect and understanding, yet I'm overlooked. What am I? Culturally responsive teaching. So if you have brain teasers for How is Your Brain Game segment and you would like to have them shared on the show, come on, let's share them on the show. Let's and email us at Let's Talk K-12 Education at gmail.com. So I do have a fun fact, but I think if I did the fun fact with our today's topic, it's going to give away too much of what we're going to talk about. So, without further ado, let me introduce to you my awesome and talented guest that will add great information, tools, and resources for our topic today. You want to know who that sassy lady is on this other side of me? Her name is Miss Losha Brooks. Losha Brooks 36 is originally from St. Louis, Missouri. I just went there a couple of weeks ago. Now resides in the great state of Texas in the DFW area. Ms. Brooks has a passion for promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, which is shown throughout her organization's commitments. Ms. Brooks is a leading thought leader regarding initiatives on various topics from DEI, culturally competency training. She's an international educator assistant, beginning teacher assistants, and much more. Mrs. Brooks continues to work nationally within the U.S. and globally in the UK and in Africa. Get it, Miss Losha? Ms. Brooks proudly graduated with a bachelor's degree in secondary education from Howard and Stowe State University, which is an HBCU. Woo! Received a master's degree in education administration from Lindenwood University and completed postgraduate work at, come on now, come through, Harvard University in the Women in Educational Leadership program. Go ahead, Miss Thang. Mrs. Brooks is currently pursuing an EDD in racial and social justice for the University of Missouri in St. Louis. Ms. Brooks' goal is to transform and enhance the landscape of education globally to advance our society and empower educators with strategies on how to increase their impact. Miss Losha, welcome to
Great,
Let's Talk. Let's welcome to the Let's Talk K-12 Education Show today.
great day, Miss Tanisha. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for allowing me on your platform. I am so excited to be here with Let's Talk K-12 Education today. I'm thrilled. I'm excited. So thank you again for the opportunity.
You are so very welcome. So listen, so today, Awesome Radio family, our hints and our wonderful guest in her area of expertise and all of her credentials and license, we're going to talk about culturally responsive educational practices today. And so the topic and some of our tentative goals is for educators, for parents, and for community members, okay? So this approach not only provides a framework for effective teaching, but also promotes a supportive learning environment that benefits the entire school community. So I do have a guest chime and check-in segment, but I don't want to get into that. I'm just going to go ahead, Miss Losha Brooks, and pull you right on in on this side of the break and go ahead and get started with this wonderful, wonderful topic and give people like myself and our listening community and viewing community some information on culturally responsive educational practices. So take it away until we get ready to go to break.
Perfect. So, one of the things that I like to share with educators, I think, in the climate of today, especially if you're if you're aware, we do have new president elects. But in the climate of today, when we talk about culturally responsive educational practices or anything that says culturally responsive or diversity, equity, and inclusion, the
Mm-hmm.
main thing that people run to in their heads is, focusing on Black students.
Yeah,
And that is simply
exactly.
not the case,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Tanisha, you've heard that, right?
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
That's a misconception. And so I have had the wonderful opportunity to teach students of all races,
Mm-hmm.
my babies, those are my babies. And so for me, helping educators to understand culturally responsive instructional practices simply means respecting and valuing every ethnicity or group of students that you are educating. And from the lens of a teacher, that means your students should be seeing themselves in your curriculum,
Yes,
seeing themselves in a positive light. When we say
yes.
responsive, right? We
Mhm.
also have a duty of being responsible with how they're also shown in our content and curriculum.
Mhm.
But more so when we talk about educational practices, we're also looking at what does that mean in terms of the roles that we serve. So it's
Yes.
not just left up to a classroom teacher, but even as a building leader, how we are being culturally responsive to our community, and even as a district as a whole, how we're being inclusive to our entire community through access and considering, the work home life balance of the communities that we are serving, and how we can better serve them through culturally responsive practices. And so that's just the gist of it. It's not just in relation to serving African American students. It's looking at our Hispanic students, our Asian students, our Arab students, our all of our students that we are serving, and making sure that their families are also represented and accounted for in our practices.
Ms. Losha, thank you so very much for breaking that concept down so eloquently. And believe it or not, I've been a teacher in a Title I school, and in my consultancy have partnered with clients that have had DEI programs and had to pull back because it caused a little controversy. I also was partnering with a educational company where they couldn't even use the term DEI. They couldn't use it was so many different terms that were triggering that we couldn't use. And so I want to thank you first of all for unpacking what that concept really means, dispelling what it's really not,
Mm-hmm.
and not just for the awesome radio viewers and listeners, but also to help someone like myself where it wasn't talked about or addressed so much during my time of teaching, but I've learned more about it really during the era of COVID, really.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and in my consultancy when I've been doing different various contracts with people, and believe it or not, and I can be at full transparency, I was so confused, like what is wrong, what is happening, what am I misunderstanding? The way that I see it, the way that you just defined it, it's just good practices.
It's great practices. It's inclusive practices to where we are not missing any of our babies or any of our families in the process. And whether that's our special needs population, having programs and access to make sure that we are catering to them and being culturally responsive to their needs, making sure they have access to, if we are providing an after school opportunity, do we have accommodations for if they attended a play, or our students who are in a deaf and hard and hearing program, do they have someone there that is able to translate for them? So are we being mindful of our student demographic that we are serving, and making sure that accommodations are in place, that we have culturally responsive practices that are inclusive to all of our students? So again, the misconception I believe is also embedded in just people being afraid of tackling progressive topics such as
Mm.
inclusivity, and making sure that it's not going against the standard norms of um race baiting for attention. And at the end of the day, I think that's where the misconceptions come in, is that when people go in and they're talking about culturally responsive, you need to teach to where Black kids can understand you. So, simple fix, let's incorporate rap music. That's not being culturally responsive to your
Thank you,
student
Losha. It's
okay. That's not what we're talking
snaps.
about. that's that,
It's
that is
it's
not,
snaps, Losha.
that is the last thing that we are talking about. Now, I mean, there can be an aspect, right? There
Right.
can be an aspect, especially if this generation of students, they listen to a lot of hip hop or things like that. But when we are talking about actually being culturally responsive, is number one, say for instance, all of the things going on with the election right now, we know a lot of students come with adult rhetoric, right? So how
Mhm.
can we address that? whether we have forums after school to where students can actually talk about politics and have a greater understanding, share their thoughts and feelings about it. That is being culturally responsive, because in the culture, mainstream culture right now, we know that we have these two sides that adults are trying to, pick and choose which is going to be the best candidate to serve them. And at the same time, students are ingesting that
That's
rhetoric. And
true.
so that
That's
shows
true.
in how they're interacting at school by spewing these things.
That's
Let's
true.
create a space and opportunity for them to debrief as young
Yes.
people and to
Yes.
be brought into the conversation. That's
Hmm.
culturally responsive practices. Or even having forums for the parents in the community
That's
to come
true.
in to understand the different amendments that are going to impact the funding that their educational organization is receiving. So
That's true.
there's so many ways that culturally responsive practices can look and show up inside our organizations. It's just in respect to the roles that we serve. As a former classroom teacher, the way that I handle culturally responsive instructional practices was making sure, when I moved to Texas, I looked at my student demographic. I saw that I was going to have 51% Hispanic students. Now was going to be my main demographic. As an English teacher, it was my duty to make sure that I brought in content
Come on,
and
come through.
even addressed my classroom environment to make sure that my students could see themselves in a positive light through the content that I utilize, and
Hmm.
also again through the way that I actually enhance my classroom. So my students came in, they saw, pictures of Che Guevara, other notable Latinx people that would make them know that this teacher has been intentional about the representation that is shown towards me inside of the classroom.
Come
So
through. Come through. Listen, Losha, you better stop. I'm gonna take my lint. I'm gonna hand it to you, okay? Because you dropping some gems. You're dropping some boulders. And what I'm hoping in this climate that we're in is that everyone is taking a moment to catch their breaths and get educated.
yes,
Okay? Not just listen to the message, but pay attention to the messenger. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about little lives that we're talking about here. And I know that we have just a few minutes before we go to break, but I want to share something with you that I just saw right before I got on. This is from a former student that I taught when they were in sixth grade. They were a high flying student, and the mother shared, and it's public, but I won't give specifics. The mother shared on Facebook that this child who is extremely, the student, he's a young man now, the student who is extremely bright, called her at 2 a.m. this morning, talking about not people not understanding what cultural responsive practices are. And she had to minister to him and talk to him because he was distraught about adults having conversations about how they are or aren't going to associate themselves, with one person or another based upon what their belief system is, what is happening now. And that just put me in tears, because this is a strong, always has been since I taught them in sixth grade, a very strong, confident individual. So for me to see on Facebook that there's not a lot of cultural responsive awareness and what it is and what it's not, she had to really minister to him. So that just broke my heart. But anyway, you are bringing up some very good points, and I really, this show, honestly, people need to take out their pad and pencils, and this is almost like another mastermind, and jot these things down so that they're understanding what it is and what it's not. Because at the end of the day, you can't say this does not impact you if your child goes to school and gets caught up in this and not understanding what it is, or their educators aren't understanding, or stakeholders understanding, and they get upset. They're bringing that home. So I'm really loving. I'm excited about our show today, Losha. Oh my goodness. Um, Oh, okay. Let me stay focused. Okay. So, Losha, thank you so much for providing some insight around what culturally responsive educational practices are, defining what it is, giving some practical examples. But before we continue this discussion, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, we'll continue with culturally responsive educational practices for educators, students, and their families that can impact student learning. Please don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Let's Talk K-12 Education Show on Awesome Radio, WECU 107.5 FM and 1570 AM, where we make education everyone's business. We'll be right back after this short message. Welcome back, awesome radio family, WECU 107.5 FM and 1570 AM. You can find us here talking about all things education every Tuesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. on Let's Talk K-12 Education. You looking for us? You can find us on Facebook, Awesome Radio 107.5 FM and 1570 AM with the beautiful purple and green logo. You can also find us on YouTube at www.youtube.com at Awesome Radio WECU. Again, look for that beautiful purple and green logo. You want to email us some K-12 educational topics, or if you've got some riddles or brain teasers for the How is Your Brain Game segment, email them. Email us at Let's Talk K-12 Education at gmail.com. So let's go on and get into it. Before the break, Losha Brooks checked and chimed in and took us all the way to school and defined what culturally responsive educational practices are, what it is, what it's not. She even educated me because in my role as a coach and a consultant, I was confused as to what the problems were when it's just good practices at the end of the day. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let Miss Losha continue the discussion around that, and hopefully we can have some paradigm shifts of what culturally responsive educational practices look like. So take us back to school, Miss Losha.
Thank you again, Tonitia, for that. We had a very good conversation early, just jumping into it. One of the things that I would like to challenge us as educators to even reflect on when we think about culturally responsive educational practices is just our cycle of socialization, right? Taking a look at where we first learned about others that did not represent the communities that we came from. If we are to educate those babies that are inside of our schools, we first have to address how we first viewed those types of students, right? And so unpacking that and really reflecting on that really tells a lot about how we view those students' learning abilities.
That's true.
Right? And so some of these things, we have to check that first before we can get down into culturally responsive practices, because if we have negative opinions, if we encounter them with a negative thought at growing up, when you hear conversations growing up about a certain group of people who are now the students that we are teaching, right? And this can be within the same race and class of people, okay? So it's not synonymous with just how white educators may view blacks. It can also be in reference to how a certain class of black educators view a certain class of black students, right? So again, culturally responsive educational practices should have you to reflect on this. Like I mentioned, when I realized I was going to be teaching Hispanic babies, I said, I want to do my due diligence as an educator to see how do I build community and relationships with those home communities. I bought books. I bought books on best practices when engaging with Latinx students, okay, Latina students. I wanted to make sure that I asked about, how's your tia doing? Okay.
That's true.
If I know with my black and brown babies that they got aunties that they really care about, or their grandma, their nana, I'm making sure that that is a point that I'm building on as far as creating community and
relationships building.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who it is. You're going to get some positive outcomes when you do just what you did.
That relationship piece matters. And so again, from a culturally responsive lens, making sure that you understand how your biases may show up so that you can perfect them throughout your practices. And so I just like to share that, you know, that cycle of socialization, because it is it can be a major barrier to how we
Mhm.
show up in our educational practices. And if we just do a little self reflection, that will take us far as what are next steps we consider. So things like building leaders. When we are thinking about how does culturally responsive practices show up in my role, if you
Mhm.
have the charge of having your parent teacher conferences, and we know that some of our home communities have had negative experiences within
Yes.
the school system, there are
Mhm.
things that you can do to think outside of the box.
That's
You have
true.
some other higher ed organizations that are in your community. What if you're trying to increase your college and career attendance for your
Mhm.
students post
Mhm.
graduation? Maybe
Yes.
you can then partner with those organizations to say, hey, we're getting ready to have our parent teacher conferences. Can we
Mhm.
host that up here? Is your
Yeah.
building available? That is
Nice.
something that you can do from a culturally responsive leadership perspective.
That's true.
How can you do outreach? Or if you know a lot of your community members attend church, see if you can partner with the church. And this does not have to be a thing to where you're promoting religion. You can
That's
use
true.
their annex building.
That's
Okay, you
true.
can use their community room, and then the
Mhm.
parents are gonna know, like, wow, they reaching
Mhm.
out to St. James AME, whatever the church name. Okay, they hosting a family fun night. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So this is just getting you to think about how does culturally responsive practices show up with respects to your position. And so my main thing that I want the audience to take away is there's no cookie cutter method. The only
Yeah.
method is being open to learning and being willing to learn. As I have started my doctorate program, one of the things
Mhm.
that I'm looking at, I'm such a nerd. And so I just really dig into the data. I even look at our teacher preparation programs and how we have this same system of oppression that is being pushed and indoctrinated in our teacher preparation program
Come through.
because they don't know any other way. And so, right or
You
wrong,
should
when
come
we think
through.
from a culturally responsive lens, how, if we have those seats, if you are on a collegiate level in a teacher preparation program, how can you then begin to think about addressing your role with a culturally responsive lens? If you know that your educators in your preparation programs are probably going to secure a position working with babies that they have never experienced with, that they're not doing their practicum with, maybe it's time to shift our thinking with extending them opportunities to go and work in maybe a urban or suburban school district, vice versa, whichever one
That's
is
true.
going to allow them to perfect their practices and to gain on the job training so that
Right.
they don't have a culture shock once they're finally in the classroom with babies who don't look like them.
Losha, let me get a piece. Let me get a little piece. You can't
Take
have
it
all the fun,
away.
Losha, before
Take it
we go to
away.
break. You said something, and I think that this was addressed in one of my other previous shows with my other guests. I can't remember which one it was right offhand, but just so that they know that this isn't a black thing, white thing, Latin thing, we address that we have our own biases within our own race. And one of the things that I saw as a teacher leader mentoring young teachers, African American teachers that were far removed from some of the students that they taught, I had to talk to them no different, and coach them no different than a teacher that wasn't the same color, because they don't understand those systems, they don't understand those challenges, they don't understand what do you mean these parents don't have $100 for these kids to attend a field trip. What do you mean they don't understand the difference between these are logs and not pieces of wood? So you said a whole mouthful, a whole masterclass with that, because if the people are leaning in and they're paying attention and they're taking notes, they're going to understand that culturally responsive educational practices has really nothing to do with race. It has to do with what you're not familiar with, and make yourself familiar with it. Woo! Yes, you dropped the whole mouthful, because I think that we have to understand what our biases are, because we have a certain responsibility once we enter that educational organization, entity, school building, classroom, whatever it is. We have a certain responsibility to self-reflect so that
Mhm.
we're showing up as the best that we can to provide these children with the best educational opportunities for utmost outcomes. So I know we're getting ready to go to break. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to continue our discussion with Losha Brooks around culturally responsive educational practices for educators, students, and their families that can impact student learning. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Let's Talk K-12 Education Show on Awesome Radio, WECU 107.5 FM and 1570 AM, where we make education everyone's business. We'll be right back on the other side of this short break. Thank you. Welcome back, Awesome Radio at 107.5 FM and 1570 AM WECU, promoting educational equity for the families in our listening and viewing community. I'm the host, but you and the community mean the most. Please email us your K-12 educational suggestions or topic ideas at Let's Talk K-12 Education at gmail.com. Y'all, before we went to the break, Miss Losha went on an unpacked culturally responsive educational practices, and she continues to define it with the most simplistic ways. I should have had you before I partnered with some of the clients to really understand what it is. So before she continues her discussion, I'm going to provide a few examples of the what, why, and how that you, as the listening audience, viewing audience, stakeholders, educators, families, anyone with wraparound services, what it means for culturally responsive educational practices. And I'm going to give just a few. I have a couple, but I'm just going to give a few. And hopefully Ms. Losha can chime in. So here are some practical strategies for K-12 educators, families, and stakeholders to strengthen the home to school connection through culturally responsive educational practices. Number one, community cultural events and showcases. What is that? Organize school-wide events that celebrate the diverse cultures represented in the school community, such as multicultural night, where students and families can share traditional foods, music, stories, and artifacts. Why? This helps educators understand the backgrounds and traditions of their students, fostering stronger relationships and building a welcoming school culture, which is something which is thematic, which is something Miss Brooks has repeated several times. How can you do it? Families can volunteer, share family recipes, or help students create presentations, making the event a true community collaboration. She touched a little bit on that as well, because she bad to the bone like that. Number two, a culturally relevant curriculum input. Ooh, we get ready to lose some people, Losha. We get ready to lose some people. What is it? It invite parents and community members to participate in curriculum planning by sharing stories, customs, or literature from their culture that relate to classroom topics. Why would you do that? Families feel valued, and educators gain a richer understanding of the cultures present in their classrooms, helping them adapt their content accordingly. Oh, my. How? Host regular meetings or create an advisory board where families and community members can share cultural insights or suggest curriculum additions. How am I doing so far, Losha?
Hey, those are the key components to making a community feel welcome. Those are the key components.
I give
Absolutely.
myself some ed snaps.
Yes,
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 I'm
yes.
excited. So, what do you have? I've got a few more, but do you have some insight around those? I know you shared some information. I can keep going if you need a minute to kind of grab what you need. I've got one
I
more.
am listen, I don't want my computer to die. There we go. Woo.
Okay,
Okay. I
okay,
didn't I didn't want my computer to die on us there. We are good. But
that's
no,
good.
there were some things that you had mentioned as far as having home communities bring in actual like books and discussing different books and things like that, I think that is always a great talking point, simply because there are a lot of English teachers who don't have culturally responsive literature to share with their students because they are so unaware. But when
Mhm,
you invite those home communities in, that's when you can learn about authors that you are not traditionally introduced to through your
mhm,
studies. And I even
mhm.
know for me, I didn't, I, you know, I didn't follow the rules. I would have teachers on my teaching team would say,
No.
hey, we've had these lesson plans for 15 years. We really don't want to switch books. And I'm like, this is not the same student from 15 years ago. So in order for me to be a culturally responsive instructor, I need to bring in new material so that my students can engage. And so again, I think it would be nice for organizations to have an opportunity to bring in home communities to share literature. Like when you said that, I was like, that is phenomenal, because some teachers, they have already went through their programs and training. Unless
Mhm,
someone is sharing this information with them about different authors with different backgrounds, they might
mhm,
not get it. So that is
mhm.
very excellent. That's very excellent.
And to bring it home, I was working with a very large educational company that had a curriculum. In fact, they got several different products, but I particular was one of their learning specialists to promoting middle grades uh, ELA and reading. And when they would go out to discuss the curriculum, they had to tiptoe around. They had to actually, bring in their lawyers. This is how deep this stuff is. Bring in their lawyers because some of the schools and some of the families of the schools would challenge some of the books and resources that they had in the curriculum. So, what I will do, I'm going to put a little disclaimer in there and a caveat. Some of the things that Lotion and I are mentioning and providing resources for, of course, if you're not a rebels like me and Losha, definitely check with your curriculum leaders, kind of run it by a coffee chat, maybe with your principals, so that you're doing it in the most non-threatening way as possible. Because even though culturally responsive educational practices is nothing scary, it's the language and the climate that we're in that people are making it something that it is not. Um, Man, so don't get me going, because it is definitely one of those. Bring it on in. I know you want to say something, Losha. What's up?
The other thing that I was going to say too, and this is no fault of anyone, but even as you mentioned, there are some organizations who thought that they might be ready to do the work, right? And just jumped at having someone come in to do, whether they call it a DEI training, an equity training, something that would address these things. And because there is so much confusion around wording, and they did not
That's
take their
true.
time to structure out the
That's true.
content, this
Mm-hmm.
is where you have all of the news media implying that DEI professional development is bad, it's damaging to organizations. It's
Mm-hmm.
bad when it's not done right.
That's
It is
true.
absolutely wonderful when there's intentionality and you have the right people. And so being strategic with, looking at the partners, the thought partners that you're working with, if you're in a
Mm-hmm.
leadership role and this
Mm-hmm.
is something that you're bringing in, you really want to vet and make sure that they have a track record of introducing this content in a way that is well received by your organization. That will be reflected in the way that they even staff it. It is impossible, and I don't want to use the word impossible. It's more advantageous to have an organization to reflect the demographic of the organization that they're serving, because you're already reducing barriers. Okay. And
Mm.
so when you have an organization that is displaying the intentionality that they have with respects to the work and even their presenters for doing the work, you're going to have a better buy-in, but also even just making sure that they do have a track record of success, or that those people that they're bringing to your organization have displayed a level of commitment. And so I just like to mention that, because while we may have great intentions as a leader and saying, my staff going to do this DEI training or equity training, it's not something that should just be done haphazardly.
That's true.
It needs some intentionality. You want to make sure that they have all of the variables on your organization,
Mm-hmm.
your staff and student demographic, your
Mm-hmm.
gifted and talented enrollment,
Mm-hmm.
your disciplinary data, their access to advanced programming. You really want to make sure that these things are introduced in a strategic manner by
Yes,
aggregating data
that's
specific
true.
to your district so the
Oh,
content can be relevant.
oh,
So
Lotion.
that's really all I had to say about
You,
that.
no, no, you talking. We can close it right now if we wanted to, because you're talking about. I think you will get that buy-in, because I explained in one of my other ones, because of my clinical teacher and because of one of my practicum teachers. I am a data chick. That is with data with scores. That is with data with initiatives. And thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that you do get the buy-in, and it probably feels less threatening if we know why we're doing what we're doing. If we have tangible, read it right here. This is what our demographics tell us about our school, about our district. So these are the things that we're going to do as it pertains to culturally responsive educational practices. We got no ulterior motives. This is so that we are doing all of that we know to do, best practices to move the needle in this school. Because something has to be done, Losha. I've read articles upon articles, especially when I do my research for the shows. I want to say, I want to feel hopeful, but I do know that some major paradigm shifts and practices have to take place. We are not making the mark. I don't care where these kids are going, unless it's just straight private, with making sure that there's rigor involved. These children know who they are, and putting the right type of teachers and educators in front of them. We've got to learn. We've got to do some things a little more radical if we're going to move the needle. I'm more apt to buy if you come to my door, Losha, and say, Tanisha, I've got this product that I want you to buy. I'm more apt to buy it, even if it's something I never entertained buying. If you tell me, if you give me stats, if I know you've paid attention to me, what I like, why I like it, and why it's important to me, I'm gonna more than likely be like, okay, where do I buy? So it's the same thing when it comes to our educational system. And I really wish, my ask for our community, for our stakeholders, locally, nationally, and internationally, is that we pay attention to what it is that our school systems are needing. It's not a one size fits all. Whew. Okay, I got it out, Losha. I got it out.
No,
It's not a one.
you're absolutely
It's not a one
you're
size fits all.
yeah, you are absolutely on point with it. You're absolutely on point with it. And I I believe that we're making strides. The media spews a lot of propaganda that will have you think that we're moving backwards. And of
Mhm.
course, that's what the media is to do. But it also lets, when I talk to people and they like, yeah, they killing DEI everywhere. That just shows you that it's such a growing need for it.
Yes,
That
it is.
people who are really invested and interested in change will have to make the adjustments appropriate, which is educating others who would like to be involved in, I believe, the great work, but just don't have all of the structures in place
True.
so that
True.
it can be better received. So I don't
True.
think it's going anywhere at all. Like I mentioned, teacher preparation programs, that's one of our root causes or roots of I think dissonance when it comes to culturally responsive instruction. If you look at the numbers and you see 70% non-minority women are at the forefront of those teacher preparation programs where this same system gets perpetuated, also rooted in niceness. They don't want to rock the boat. They want to go with the things that have always been done. When we can truly have a dialogue centered around how can we change the direction of these educator programs to address it through a culturally responsive lens, we will see more headway. And I do think we're moving in that direction.
Good. And I know that I have worked with some people that were clever that was like, oh, you don't like the term DEI? No problem. You know I'm going with this, don't you? We
Yeah.
won't use the term DEI, but we're still doing the same thing. I wanna go back just a second, Losha, for our radio viewers and listeners. And I want to go back to when you moved from St. Louis and moved to the DFW area of Texas, where you had a large Latinx population of students, and you did the culturally responsive educational practices. I want you to kind of share some ways that you knew the needle moved when you did culture responsive educational practices for that group of students, because I'm a data person, so
Yes.
let's hear it. Let's talk about it.
Well, first it's also in the response that I get from my students, with the engagement that I get from my students. And so the numbers were 51% Hispanic, Latinx students, Latinx, and then 49% African American, and then the rest of my student demographics were other,
Mm-hmm.
small. And so with it, my black and brown babies were so excited to learn about all of the different cultures that I was bringing in, because they saw themselves being represented in
Yes.
it. And so I just had high engagement compared to everybody else on my team. With respects to any of our data, my students were performing at a high level
Woo!
because I always brought in what I call supplemental resources, but it was literally just culturally responsive resources. I
Mm-hmm.
made sure that if we had a main textbook curriculum that I knew was not addressing my students, I made sure that I pulled in relevant material that my students would be able to relate to. We would still align it with those TEKS. Those are the Texas standards, and
Oh
making
yes.
sure that we still accomplish the goals of whatever it was they were expected to learn. But I brought in material. Of course, it does take some intentionality on the educator's part, on my part as the instructor, to make sure my lessons are still addressing the standards, but I
Mm-hmm.
still have to make sure that it's engaging for my students, that they have a connection to it, and that
Mm-hmm.
they will be able to see, how is this relevant to me and my life
Yes.
and my family, my
Mm-hmm.
relation to the world. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, performing on a very high level.
Beautiful. And I also like that you address that it's Texas. It's a couple more states, because I learned this with working with that other professional, that other educational company that they don't use the Common Core, and
Yeah.
they have their own. So that was good for you to address that as well. Again, listening radio audience, if there's some things that let me see if I've got some resources. I don't have any resources. Maybe you got maybe one or two resources. But I want to say thank you so very much for providing that the data to support that. I'll thank you so very much for educating us, including myself, and getting I knew enough to be dangerous, but really in my world as a consultant, that's important for me to know, working with various organizations and various subgroups and categories of people, which I technically am a culturally responsive educational practitioner. But now that you've broken it down even further, I now have something to connect my learning to, so that I'm not just doing it. I think sometimes too we do it just out of good practice, but it when you bring someone into, involve them in the process, that also makes a difference. Listen, sweetie, I didn't just bring this particular clothing in to talk about it. I brought it in because ABC. I always do better. And I think in my experiences with being a high performing educator or consultant has worked because I try to make sure I'm not just doing my due diligence, but I'm also explaining along the way. So thank you.
Yes.
So let's get ready because when I say me and you could probably go another 2-3 hours. Of course, I may have to bring you back. But all right. So listen, thank you all for joining us today on today's episode of the Let's Talk K-12 Education Show. We hope you enjoyed the discussion and found inspiration in exploring culturally responsive educational practices with Miss Losha Brooks. Remember, prioritizing culturally responsive teaching is not just a strategy. It's the foundation for thriving students, engaged educators, and connected families. A special thank you to our wonderful guest, Losha Brooks, for sharing your insights and expertise. Your contributions truly brought depth to our conversation, shedding light on the real impact and benefits of culturally responsive educational practices. Don't forget to share your thoughts and views on our previous shows by go to Facebook, go to YouTube, and remember if you have topics or ideas or brain teasers for how is your brain game, email us at let's talk K-12 education at gmail.com. So, again, this is Tonitia Langley, your educational enthusiast, thought leader, and show host for Let's Talk K-12 Education every Tuesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Until the next time, stay well and continue to make educational equity everyone's community business. Thank you for tuning in today on Awesome Radio, WECU 107.5 FM and 1570 AM. Me and Losha Brooks are out. See you next week.